Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another Civic and Community Engagement video brought to you by the Merrimack College Institute or Merrimack Institute for New Teacher Support at Merrimack College. We are so excited to have two special guests here, and I would just love to introduce them and dive right into our interview and conversation. So first we have Noorya Hayat, who is a senior researcher at the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, also called CIRCLE, working on qualitative and quantitative research that helps promote civic learning and engagement in the K-12 education system and beyond. She is interested in narrowing gaps in civic education, awareness, and life opportunities for under-resourced communities by providing evidence-backed research for decision-making and policies. She holds an Ed.M from the Harvard Graduate School of Education with a focus towards global education and citizenship for the 21st century, monitoring and evaluating for improving education systems and applied data analysis. She also has a background in economics and anthropology, as well as teaching experience in early childhood education. And for our other presenter, we have Dr. Elaine Ward, who is from Merrimack College. Our office is right next to each other, and Dr. Elaine Ward has worked in higher education for more than 20 years, both here and in Europe. Elaine is a faculty member at Merrimack College in the Masters of Higher Education department and serves as the Special Assistant to the President for Civic and Community Engagement. Elaine has demonstrated commitment to shared governance and has served on the executive committee of the Faculty Senate and has served as a Merrimack AAUP chapter officer and is the current AAUP chapter president. Elaine has also been the faculty champion of Merrimack's successful application for the Carnegie Elective Classification for Community Engagement and is currently leading a presidential initiative at the college to advance and institutionalize the college's civic and community engagement commitments. So those are both super impressive biographies. We're so happy to have you both, and I'm super excited to just listen to the conversation that you two will have. So whenever you're ready, please take it away.
Thank you, Amanda, so very much. Noorya, thank you again for spending time with us today. We really, really look forward to draw on your experience and your expertise as we help prepare the next generation of our teachers to be civic engagement, democratic learning educators. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your path into this work, and then a little bit about your role at CIRCLE and what CIRCLE is in general.
Right, sure. Let me start with the last one. So CIRCLE is, as Amanda said, it's the Center for Information and it's Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement. It's part of the Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. So we're based out of Medford. I live in Chelsea, so I'm working from home, but Tisch College and CIRCLE are based out of Medford, but we've got staff in DC as well. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I love working with teachers. Yeah, so a bit about myself. Yeah, Amanda gave a bio too, so I'll keep it short, but I am Pakistani American, and I have kind of, because my parents moved around a lot, I've kind of grown up in different cultures, and that really shaped my worldview. I had a background in development economics and anthropology. I worked in public health. I worked in different sectors, but all through both living in different cultures and societies, but also working in different sectors. I think I just always came across as education as that lever of change, particularly for women, and particularly for marginalized women or young women of color. And that was my drive of like, what is it? So if I was working in public health, nutrition awareness for children was highest in kids whose moms were educated and were aware, right? So every time I would come back to this in development economics, like where is it that you see growth? And it was education usually as a lever that would change communities, that would change societies. So that's how I actually came into this, into how do we help young people develop that kind of critical consciousness that they can change themselves, their communities, solve their local problems together, and create change, right? How do we empower young people to do that? And there are many levers to that, but I think the potent power of schools and particularly teachers come here, right? Teachers prepare our next generation. and how they, I think that they were most influential in my life too, of how they developed that kind of critical thinking and consciousness and awareness, and how do you move in this world? I think that's critical. So that's how I came in this, and then and that's how I came into Circle as well. So that's mainly where I work as a researcher, using K-12 civic ed and working with teachers and doing research on a lot of work they do, including just in Massachusetts. And I'll talk more about that a bit later too.
Okay, great. We look forward to learning more about your research agenda. And then I'm hopeful that you'll then talk about how your research might lead to policy change, right? And influence change. So what do you think that new teachers need to know about the importance of educating the next generation of democratically engaged citizens? So why is this work important?
I think when you look at the history of this nation, right, it's the the main task of public schooling was to prepare knowledgeable and motivated citizens to participate in American self-government, right? That is the crux of public schooling, and teachers do that great work, right? So if we start from that basis, that teachers are, since Circle's founding, we've been advocating that teachers in schools are the guardians of democracy, right? That is what teachers in schools are tasked to do. That when we need to invest and prepare young people, every generation, because you don't inherit this civic skills, knowledge, or attitudes, right? Every generation needs to learn this and needs to learn how self-government in America works. And then you need to prepare that generation. So this task is monumentally important then in a democracy, and particularly one of the oldest democracies that has great institutions. But those institutions don't just uphold themselves. People need to know how to do that. Young people, the next generation that we pass on to, need to know how to do that, right? And we have seen in recent years a disinvestment in this sector, so in civics in general, and we have seen more and more polarization in our society as well. And we have seen, I mean, young people are amazing, but we have also seen a lack of disinvestment in creating those skills and attitudes and dispositions to have democratically engaged citizens, lead to lack of consensus on a lot of topics and leading to more polarization. So I think for a functioning democracy, right, you need active, engaged, critically aware citizens that know how to exist in a pluralistic society. Um, and that's where teachers come in. So a healthy constitutional democracy requires citizenry that has knowledge, skills, dispositions, and a desire to participate in it. And the founding fathers designed a form of government that required each new generation to learn to play its part. And because we've neglected the history and civics for many decades, I think in the United States has a citizenry and an electorate that are highly polarized, like I said, and then poorly trained to meet the modern challenges that we're facing, both globally, and I think the pandemic kind of exposed that to a greater extent in the past decade. Um, and then when I talk about disinvestment, at the federal level, Elaine, we spend approximately $50 per student per year on STEM fields and approximately 5 cents per student per year on civics, right? Not that STEM fields are not important,
Yeah.
but that is the level of disinvestment in this. And then on top of that, there's a lack of consensus about the substance of history and civics education, like what and the how. I don't think, particularly talking to new teachers or social studies teachers, I don't think you need to argue about the need for civics, but where the problem comes is what and how to teach, right? Particularly, as I said, we know how much polarization or how much polarized our society is. So that's been a major obstacle to maintaining excellence in history and civics education in recent decades. And so I think teachers who have those knowledge, skills, and dispositions themselves, that are critically aware themselves, can then instill those values in in students as well, because they know how to do, they're trained, they're supported. Um, and our research has shown this over and over again, that if teachers are confident and competent to do that, they know how to support students in the same inquiry. I'll talk more about this, and I'm sure we'll go there. Circles like had this kind of unique expertise of working with teachers and having that kind of like seminal research into this of what constitutes good civic education, and what constitutes good um, support for teachers and professional development that helps teachers do this, including our research just recently in Massachusetts. But yeah, um,
I love what you said about teachers and schools as the guardians of democracy, right? And I'm just thinking that if we had have done this interview, a month and a half ago, 6 weeks ago, before January 6th, what kind of a conversation we might have been having, right? And so when you make a statement like teachers and schools are the guardians of democracy, and that teachers themselves, it sounds like, have a responsibility to prepare themselves, through developing their own knowledge, their own skills, and cultivating those dispositions to be able to be confident and competent as they educate the next generation of our citizenry, right, is more important now than ever, right? Because of the situation that we find ourselves in, particularly in this country. And so what's our collective responsibility then, to help our teachers be as prepared as possible, right? So that in spite of the disinvestment, right, those larger policy issues exist. And yes, there needs to be action there, right? Because the disinvestment is real. But in spite of that, how can we help our teachers be the best that they can be?
Exactly. I wanted to add also that I think public schooling, not only as guardians of democracy and as places of democratic engagement, it's also a place where, people or from ideologically and demographically and economically diverse um, strata come together in a classroom. It's a unique and powerful place for teachers to impact change, right? And to have a more equitable and democratic society. And so I think public schooling in particular is one of those places in that classroom of civics or social studies or wherever, or across STEM too. You can have civics interdisciplinary, right? That has a unique place in creating those foundations when people are young, and having them sit together and talk about issues. How do you do that? How do you develop those skills? uh, I think teachers are critically important, and I wish we did so much more to support them.
Yeah, agreed. Noorya, tell us a little bit about what the state and federal policies are that drive this work that new teachers need to be and should be aware of.
Yeah. I'll start with Massachusetts, because I think that would, in the context. And Circles had this kind of unique experience and expertise of working with state-led civic education policies and change. As states kind of looked inwards and started changing policies, it first started with Florida and the Sandra Day O'Connor's work over there. And then we worked in with Illinois for a while as they passed a civic education law to support their teachers, and we've been following them for the past 3 to 4 years now. And then just recently in Massachusetts, a civic education law was also passed around teaching civics, and also having action-based civics. So 8th grade and high school teachers have to have, or schools need to have a project before they graduate. The Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education also revised its history and social sciences framework, and also came up with a civics project guideline. So that's been underway. All of that got published in 2018, and the implementation year was 2020-21. So there's been a lot of support to do that, but it is an inquiry-based framework. So it is a shift from content-based teaching towards a more inquiry arc, right? and how do you support student-centered learning that is culturally responsive, that has social emotional learning incorporated, and helps students become active citizens that have those skills, that have the knowledge and the attitudes, right?
Mm.
So I think for new teachers who would come, would have a lot of local resources that kind of cater to that inquiry arc and inquiry framework, and a revised set of standards that really help teachers do that. If they're like in middle school, or particularly if they're 8th grade or high school, you have a civics project, and there's a lot of guidance on that too. Amanda, I'll send you the links to that too. There are a lot of PD that's happening around that for teachers to support project-based learning and assessment, and how to support students to do that. We know we're in the pandemic, but I think there's a lot of online support that's still going on around that. So I think locally, teachers can find a lot of that. And Circle is trying to provide that too. So we're trying to provide some space where teachers come and talk to each other. Because a lot of times civics teachers are alone in their school, or they feel alone because civics is sometimes not prioritized. Just in the study we did in Massachusetts, it was funded by DESE as well. We found that out, that a lot of teachers, particularly once the pandemic hit, was like, civics is not, or humanities is not prioritized. We don't know how to make the case to prioritize it. But then we also heard really successful stories of teachers using that space, and a pandemic had hit, students were grappling and using that space as incorporating student-based experiential learning, bringing in their experiences to talk about societal issues. And teachers who were trained to do that did it really well, even online. So I think it's a matter of supporting our wonderful teachers to do that. So I'd start with that. And then you said federal policies. So I think, and I was telling Amanda this before, our conversation, I think, has come at a really particularly great time for civics and social studies and history teachers, because the Educating for American Democracy project was launched this week. And that is a project funded by the National Endowment for Humanities and the US Department of Education, that gave a grant to iCivics, to Harvard, to Tufts University, Circle, and Arizona State University, and brought together a national network of more than 300 scholars, educators, practitioners, teachers, students, from demographically and ideologically diverse backgrounds to come together and kind of solve the issue that we're talking about, like the what and the how of teaching, because
Mm.
that is where the contention is in civics, right, and history, right? It's not, I don't think anyone would argue we don't need to have civics education or history. It's like, what is there? The argument is around substance and then the pedagogy of it. And so they just came out with the report and a plethora of resources and documents, including a pedagogical companion, that walks through this from K to 5 and then 6 to 12. It helps teachers, and it helps administrators. So it's a roadmap. So it's not a curriculum, it's not standards, it's not a framework, it's an advisory in some ways, but it is in a way prompting states and local districts to take that and adapt it to the local level. So it provides all this wonderful knowledge of decades and decades of research into a very accessible format. So it's a national guidance that states, local districts, and educators, most importantly, can use to transform teaching of civics and history to sustain our constitutional democracy
Mm.
and to meet the needs of our diverse and pluralistic 21st century students that come into the class, the student body, right? Um, the roadmap, it's called EAD, so Educating for American Democracy Roadmap, and accompanying documents give like suggested educational strategies, pedagogies, and suggested content for history and civics, right? So it's very, very accessible, I think, and at every grade level. So it's not just like, we always hear from middle school teachers like PDs for high school teachers, and then we have to tone it down for 8th grade, or elementary school teachers that we heard in Massachusetts too, of like, we have no PD in civics, right? And we just kind of make this up, even though they're pre-K standards. And so, you know, And then it's committed to providing instructional strategies and content for all learners. So it's
Mhm.
very equity focused that way, or at least a great step towards equity. It is a living document, so I think, when teachers start using it, there'll be a lot of input on how, and we can make it more equitable. Um, but that's the thought behind it, that, how do you ensure excellent research-backed, practitioner-backed history and civic learning opportunities that are delivered equitably throughout your country. And I
Great.
can talk more and more about that,
Yeah.
but I think that's a good start if you want to talk about state and federal policies.
Yeah, that's great. Can you help us understand a little bit more fully? You mentioned that there might be standards, but there may not be professional PD opportunities, or there may not be other resources. So can you help the teachers understand that if there are standards that they're expected to achieve, but there aren't the resources and supports there, what might a strategy be to help the teacher prepare themselves to meet those standards effectively?
Yeah, I mean, I think first I would say, particularly for new teachers, reach out to other teachers. There are a lot of veteran teachers who've been in the field. So reach out and develop a network of sorts. There are, and you will find them, particularly if I don't, Elaine, you would know so many in your district. So reach out and do that. If you can have, if you can observe teachers, even if you
Yeah.
can do it online, I think
Yeah.
that's a great opportunity. We saw that in Massachusetts too, that teachers had mentor support from or coaching from other teachers, including professional development and civics focused professional development. But we also found out that 2 in 5 teachers had never had any civics focused PD
Mm.
from our survey. So there's there's a push for that, but it is far. And teachers also said that they have to actually like seek out PD themselves. So
Right.
I think the best resource is other teachers. I just had a session with Massachusetts teachers last month, and we were just talking about the report that came out for Massachusetts and, having teachers. And we did it by grade band, so elementary, middle, high school. And teachers just talked to each other. It's like, oh, that's what you did. And, in a span of 20 minutes on a Jamboard, teachers had more nuanced and finessed ideas about what they would do. So other teachers are really important. If you can have mentoring, if you can observe them, I think that helps. I think there are a lot of resources now, and it's more of a matter of where, like, do I have the time? Because teachers have so much on them. Or do I have the time to look at it and adapt it for my classroom? Do I do this? And for that, I would tell teachers, and particularly new teachers, because it does get overwhelming, um, like, pick one thing. Pick one thing that you would do. It's like, I'm going to make my classroom more student-centered,
Mm.
or I'm going to learn one discussion strategy. If I'm going to do current and controversial issue discussion, I'm going to learn how to do a Socratic seminar, or, a structured academic controversy, and
Mm.
just look at resources for that. Look at how other teachers have done it. Take one topic that you then build the skills around, right? So it will require students to have some sort of norms in class or classroom about democratic engagement. It would require them to have some skills about listening and also taking it back and listening to others before you speak, right?
Mm.
So you develop all of that, and then you have one strategy of like, I'm just going to talk about this one topic, and maybe have student input.
Yeah.
They'll come up with topics. So I think that's that's a approachable and accessible place to start for teachers, instead of just being like, so many standards, so many things I have to meet. Where do I start? Um,
Great. And I think that you're lifting up that there are a lot of resources out there. The challenge is time, right? And then so along with the resources is what are the strategies to get in and actually be able to access those resources. Um, it sounds like the networking and the mentoring will address that problem that
I
you.
would say, yeah, I would say the Educating for American Democracy, I'll send the link for that too,
Yeah.
is because it's like national and local, and Circle can also help um, connect teachers. It is definitely a network teachers can tap into,
Right.
and write to others. It's very accessible. Circle also coordinates the Teaching for Democracy Alliance, which is also a network of national and local 13 organizations that come in it, and using elections and stuff as a teachable moment, and how to teach about democracy. I'll send a link for that too. So it's TFDA. Um, that's something else you can do. And then you do have really great local PD providers too, like Generation Citizen, like Facing History, like Democracy Knowledge Project locally that help teachers meet standards, or like iCivics um, that help them, with something like. So that's why I think it's also important for teachers and their like the social studies department chair to know where is it that we want to focus, where our values and mission is, where our students are at, and you can, I think, then find curated resources for that. Yeah,
Yeah, and it seems like it will address that problem that you've lifted up about civics teachers feeling alone.
yeah,
Right. And so, you can just think of all of the challenges civics teachers have with the disinvestment. It's not prioritized.
yeah,
Their work is not prioritized, feeling undervalued, and feeling isolated.
yeah,
And they're all things that we want to try to help the teachers navigate,
yep,
so that they can be as successful as they can possibly be in their crucially important role right
exactly.
now. Fantastic. So you mentioned that there were a few other things that you might want to share. And so if you could like wave a magic wand, what are your aspirations for teachers in this realm? What would you like to see have happen?
I think, Elaine, for all our research, it's showing that for in-service teachers, pre-service teachers, is support, professional development that is continuous to
Mm,
teachers, right? That's curated, that helps them develop those skills and dispositions in themselves, and then also how to do that. Like, what are the instructional strategies that help students do that, right?
yes.
Um, we Circle also follows and evaluates this micro-credentialing badging system in civics that Illinois and Florida jointly started for teachers, and they're mostly civics teachers. It's all online. And even in that space, when teachers been teaching, veteran teachers, they learn of like, okay, this is how we're going to do this informed action piece in the classroom. What does that require? And having other teachers critique it, give feedback, ask of like, this is a question that can potentially come up. This is where I feel like, I might lose agency in the classroom and control in the classroom if I let students have an open discussion. How do I rein that in? So, just hearing how other teachers have done. We can provide resources, but I think it's also a matter of actually like application of it, which I think
Mhm.
teachers really need a lot of support to do. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not particularly not easy when, we are a polarized society, and there are contentious issues, right? And how do you it is the teacher's responsibility to bring it in, but you can have a lot of support on how to do that, how
Yes.
to engage students and, from diverse backgrounds to come and talk about something,
Mm,
and then support teachers to do that. I think one of the things that the EAD project does really well for teachers is it comes up with these 7 themes and 6 pedagogical principles and then 5 design challenges. It actually walks through the heart of what teachers um, feel they need support with. We've
mm,
heard over decades, but also where the problem lies is and how you can shift from a content heavy curriculum to
yeah.
that has a lot of breadth towards depth of both knowledge, skills, and attitudes. How do you hone in on that over how do you use inquiry as as um, as a mode of teaching and as a pedagogical principle in the classroom, right? And how do you use inquiry-based teaching?
Mm,
So I think that would really help teachers who want to be more culturally responsive in the classroom, who want to have a democratically engaged classroom. But where do you start? How do you do that, right?
mm,
Um, and how do you pivot your essential question in a way that makes all students feel like they belong? How
mm,
do you do a reading of the Constitution, of the Pledge of Allegiance, of all of that in a way that everyone in the classroom feels like they have a stake in it, that they can see their identity, and they can see their responsibility in it as well. So
Great.
um,
This wasn't one of the questions that we had talked about, but what you're saying is making me curious about, we have an understanding now of the role and responsibility of teachers. What do we need to understand about the role and responsibility of administrators, of principals, of superintendents for supporting the work of teachers in this area? What work is being done on that?
I think this project also did that. It has stakeholder briefs. It has like guided discussions of like at your local level, at your tribal level. If
Mm,
this is what you do, these are some suggested actions. So it does address that. But I would say number one is talk to your teachers, right?
yeah.
I think teachers really know, right? Talk to your teachers about it and then create, like, enable that space for them to do that,
Mhm.
right? What does that require? So, for instance, in like um, talking to teachers, sometimes what comes up is like, I think I'm going to get a lot of backlash from parents if I talk about this, right?
Mhm.
And I don't want that. So, administrators then, if they're designing something like this, can, usually send out a letter to parents being very transparent. This is, we're going to have a discussion in the classroom. This is the topic and the essential question.
Very
And this
good.
is what we're going to do. And we're going to support our teacher to create a democratically engaged classroom.
Mm,
And we wanted you to know about this,
yes.
right? Having parents or local community really involved in it. So, sometimes a lot of people think civics says, or especially when there's an elections at this like federal level,
Mm,
it's like, and students feel disconnected at the local level. Civics, your civically engaged society and how you solve problems is right next to you. So
mhm.
looking at your neighborhood and your community and how do you solve problems to that, and helping teachers link that, I think community administrators, principals, district superintendents can really help teachers with that piece of connecting the local to the national policies. How does this affect you? How does it affect your students? And supporting students in that, right?
Yeah.
So I think enabling teachers and giving them space to do it. I think sometimes administrators and superintendents are in more networks and know of
Mm,
different people and connecting them. So if
mm,
they take initiative to connect to another school district,
yeah.
that really helps their teachers, right? We
Yeah.
saw this in Illinois. Once we had the teachers in a room from, that were, this was not Chicago Central. So actually the PD team like traveled across the state. And once they got teachers in a room, it was kind of organic. They contacted each other, and people from like students from urban schools didn't really think that suburban schools had any problems, or talking to them, different problems came around,
Mm, mm,
and that was eye-opening to them. So, and this is just within one state, right? So I think if you connect teachers, you enable them,
right.
even online. I think there's a very famous online Twitter chat. It's called hashtag #SSChat,
Oh,
social studies chat. A lot. It happens every few months, or even every month when there's like a topic going on. Someone hosts it. Social studies teachers from all walks of life come on Twitter, share resources. There's a topic, there's a question, and there's share resources and just chat. It's usually in the evening. It's just a Twitter platform, hashtag #SSChat, and you know, different organizations host it. Teachers come up and talk about issues or challenges. Sometimes I just log in to be like, okay, where are teachers finding issues right now? What are
yeah.
they doing? So um, just networks like that would,
Mm,
I think, really help teachers as well. And like I said, I think if the administrator, especially like a social studies department chair, if they can sit together and help teachers develop of like, what do you want to do?
yeah.
And where are the gaps? Where can we find that PD for you?
Yeah.
Or, okay, we are going to do the civics project this year. What does that require? What does that require for the school to enable that? What does that require um, you? What does that require that we, bring in resources? What does that require on our level? Um, and I think that would be tremendously helpful.
Fantastic. That's great. Is there anything else that you want to share with the new teachers or anyone who is watching us today?
I think one thing I heard when I was talking to teachers last year a lot on this was, some teachers, even when they really wanted to do this, were like, this is a pandemic, we're being taped, and I don't want to be on tape saying, Mr. X said this in class about this controversial issue. So
Mm,
I'm just not going to do this.
mhm,
And I am just going to shut it out because I know the importance of it. I know all of that, but I don't want to be in that space, particularly when I cannot see my students or parents in person. I don't want to. And I completely empathize with that. I do. It's
mhm,
not an easy position to be, but it's also why we are here, right? The January 6th was a culmination of so many things,
mhm,
particularly people not knowing how to talk to each other, how to look at another perspective, how to come to some kind of agreement on solving our common problems, right?
yeah,
Um, so I think, like I said, I think public schools and public school teachers have this tremendous responsibility and
mhm,
power to help that space, to teach equitably, in a way that all students feel like they belong and understand what their responsibility is as
mhm.
democratically engaged citizens. So I think I would like to close with don't shy away from it. There are people that will support you in this work, and I think this newly released project really lays the ground for it.
Yeah,
Sorry. So yeah, don't shy away from that responsibility. Reach out, and there
yes,
are people who will help you with that responsibility. And I know this is for civics teachers, but I think in teachers in general, in whatever discipline you teach, from economics to law to
right,
science, the civics problems are there, and you
yes.
can embed them, and you can help students research, look up, talk to each other, and build those skills.
Yeah, and when we're thinking about, experiential learning, and students being prepared for college and then for the workplace, um, being able to do the practice
Yes.
of civics through service learning or civic
Yep.
engagement or community rooted
Yep.
research is really important for us to consider. And as somebody, in the higher education arena, I feel optimistic with our conversation today, that the support and the resources, while a challenge for the teachers, those resources are there to help the teachers and the schools being the guardians of democracy, like you lifted up for us. I'm really optimistic that the students that we will receive when they come out of high school, they'll be ready for us to be able to take it to the next level. And so that we then can help, kind of hone those skills as we prepare the next generation of civic-minded, career-ready professionals moving out into society. And hopefully public service too, right?
Yeah.
Not
Yep.
just the corporate sector. I'm going to hand it back over to Amanda, but before I do that, Noorya, I just want to say thank you again for sharing your time, your resources,
Yes.
your experience, and your expertise, and your commitment to helping prepare the next generation of future teachers. I feel really honored to have spent the morning with you, and I thank you for that.
Thank
Amanda?
you so much, but Elaine and Minda, it's
No,
really
no,
an
yeah, I was
honor.
going to say the same thing. I think these resources are going to be amazing. I was, jotting down some of these acronyms, but I know you're going to be sending us the links. So
Yeah, awesome.
anybody who's watching can see that in the description box below. And I'm really glad that you also touched on that. Some of these strategies can be used for educators who aren't in the civic education arena, because we might be getting some of those people watching as well. And Elaine, thank you for moderating this interview and conversation. I also wanted to give you a minute if you had any final like takeaways or thoughts just from your own experience, and then we can
Yeah.
go from there.
I am. Before I came here, I was on our PTO meeting this morning. I have a high schooler and I have a middle schooler. And we actually had a conversation with the principal this morning about the importance of, particularly for history, right? And Noorya, you mentioned that earlier. So I've moved into my parenting role, and as a parent of children that you all are going to be teaching, I'm really, really grateful for Mints, for Noorya and Circle to help my children, our children, learn what they need to learn to be able to be who we need them to be who the world needs them to be. So as a parent, I'm going to end on that note and how grateful I am to all of you for educating my children, our children. Thank you.
Oh, beautifully said. All right, well, I think that just about wraps everything up. Thank you all for watching. Thank you both for being here and facilitating this conversation. And yeah, so we'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you so much.